We are back with another episode of App Stories. Today's episode is brought to you by Pillow, SourceGraph, and Instabug. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is the editor-in-chief of MacStories.net, Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Hello, John. How are you?
Doing all right. Getting really excited about WWDC, especially since, as we discussed during the pre-show for App Stories Plus subscribers, I am going to be out in California covering the event for Mac Stories. So that is a change from the last time you and I recorded.
Yes. So go check out the pro segment for App Stories Plus members to get more details from John and me on how this all happened. So it's going to be exciting. We're going to have more details on Mac Stories soon about sort of the kind of content that we'll put out and how we'll follow along with the event and sort of the activities that we will have in the Club Mac Stories Discord. There's going to be a full announcement of Mac Stories we're going to try and have a schedule and sort of share our plans with the community. But of course, scheduling wise, because you're out there and I'm at home and there's a 9-hour gap between us with time zones, the scheduling may not be final, is all I'm going to say. We may gonna have to, move a few things around, but we'll keep everyone posted as always.
Yes, that is definitely true. We may have to kind of change things on the fly a little bit, but we're going to do our best to stick to our plans. Well, Federico, we should start talking about macOS 13 because
you tell me about macOS. You're the macOS guy. You do your annual review, and then that's coming up quickly. It's almost time for your annual review.
It is really coming up quickly, and I'm thinking about how I'm going to approach this this year. I think July is going to be my big macOS month. Hopefully, we'll see. But last year, Monterey was seen as kind of a quiet release by some people. And I think that was partly because Universal Control was delayed. That was the big, tentpole marquee feature for that release. But I think it was also because there was more of a focus on system apps in a lot of ways than the core guts of the OS itself. But I think that was actually kind of a big story that in disguise, and the fact that for years and years, the same system apps on the Mac and on the iPhone or iPad were out of sync, especially things like Maps or Books. There's a lot of apps you can point to and see how one got updated on one platform but not the other. And it was usually iOS that got it first, which makes sense because, that's the biggest part of the market share there. But now with Monterey, those apps are in sync. And that really, to me, is part of the story that goes all the way back to 2018 when Craig Federighi finished off the WWDC keynote, or actually, I think it was the State of the Union, maybe. Well, in any event, no, it was the keynote. He finished off the keynote with a sneak peek at what was going to be called Mac Catalyst.
It was the keynote. Yep.
Yeah, Mac Catalyst the next year. And it's been quite a ride, really, with Mac Catalyst, because the first Apple apps, I think there were 5 of them, Stocks and News and a handful of others. They weren't that great. I mean, they were a little rough. They didn't have kind of that standard Mac feel. They didn't follow a lot of the conventions that people are used to. And that concerned a lot of people. Over time, though, I mean, we've been doing this now. That was 2018. It's been 4 years. A lot has changed. It's still possible, like with any framework, to build a Mac Catalyst app that's not great. That'll always be true, I think, no matter what the framework happens to be. But Apple really tightened up Mac Catalyst and made a lot of new features available that allowed developers to make those apps more easily and to make them fit into the system. And part of the story about them fitting into the system wasn't just Mac Catalyst itself. It was the design changes that we got along the way as well. And so, over those 4 years, it was quite a continuum of underlying core technologies like Mac Catalyst and Swift UI and so forth, as well as design that kind of brought this all together. And we found ourselves in Monterey with those apps all in sync. And so I think really one of my biggest wishes for 2022 is a quiet year. And I don't mean a year with no features. I mean a year where macOS just gets better than it is. I mean, there are still obviously rough spots. I mean, we saw what what happened with shortcuts in the fall. It should have probably been called a beta when it came out. I would say today it's out of beta. It's still not perfect, but it's much more 1.0 today than it was last October. And I think that what it says to, what I guess I'm getting at is that we're not at the destination where the Mac has been realigned with the rest of the product line, which I think was a lot of what was going on with Mac Catalyst and these other technologies, was to create a continuum where you have the iPhone, the iPad, and the Mac. And there's commonality where it makes sense and differences where it makes sense. And the iPad and the Mac are a lot closer together. Now, we spent 4 years with a lot of change over the course of those 4 years on the Mac, especially with the new hardware and the new M1 chipsets, but we really didn't see much on the iPad. And so I'm kind of expecting that this year, the Mac, although it has still room to grow and room to improve to get where it's going, I expect this year it to take a backseat to the iPad. And I think that that's the right thing to do.
Interesting theory. Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, I think the takeaway from me regarding Monterey and sort of it's been 4 years of Mac Catalyst. It really enabled people like me to make the to more easily transition between platforms, right? And it wasn't like this before. Like if you were an iPad user and you switched to the Mac, well, then suddenly it was like you were taken back a couple of years because all the innovation was happening on iOS and iPadOS. And so you were always at a disadvantage by using macOS instead. And now I think they have achieved this state of parity between platforms, this state of, you can now so seamlessly move between them. And I mean, universal control, it's not a coincidence that that's also a feature of Monterey. Apple is also aware of the fact that now it's so much easier and better than a few years ago to move between devices. They literally built a feature that lets you move the cursor between displays. So that's not a coincidence. And I hope that continues with macOS 13. But I also feel like this year we may see the other way around, which he also suggested. Maybe it's time for the iPad to gain some of the more advanced multitasking features of the Mac.
Exactly.
So maybe they're gonna try and achieve parity from the opposite end of the spectrum, because they said, well, now the Mac has the same apps. What about the iPad having sort of the same multitasking experience? Maybe that's the angle they're going for.
Yeah, the same power that you can get on the Mac. I think I hope that that's the angle. I really think it's possible. The other thing I guess I should say about Mac Catalyst and how it's changed since 2018 is that really beginning in 2021 and throughout this year so far, we've really seen Mac Catalyst apps come into their own, because these are the apps that we're seeing now where the developers built them with Mac Catalyst in mind. The early Mac Catalyst apps we saw were people who already had iPhone and iPad apps and were moving those apps onto the Mac, right? And they just weren't necessarily designed, through no fault of the developer, they weren't necessarily designed with the Mac in mind. So they didn't always fit in really well. But now with the advances in Swift UI, which still has a ways to go, you can do a Mac app and an iPad app that feel a lot more at home on each of those platforms and work together a lot better than they used to. And I'm thinking of apps like Marcos Tanaka's apps like Play and
Music Box.
Music Box and other things like that. That really, those are useful utilities on the Mac in a way that I didn't really see a lot of in 2020.
Yeah.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Pillow. More and more studies show that getting a good night's sleep can improve your health and well-being in more ways than you can ever imagine. Pillow is a simple app that can help you become more aware of your sleep patterns and make informed decisions to improve your sleep quality. All you have to do is wear an Apple Watch while you sleep. Pillow does the rest, tracking and analyzing your sleep automatically and giving you a full report in the morning. If you want to use Pillow with just an iPhone or an iPad, you can do that too, with the press of a button. Apple Watch wearers can also get important information about their heart rate trends, variability, heart rate dip, and blood oxygen levels for every sleep session. You can even record sounds like sleep talking, sleep apnea, snoring, and other noises that might be affecting your sleep. If you have an Apple Watch that's a Series 6 or newer, Pillow will also display information about the intensity of those sounds during each sleep session and give you a rating of that exposure. Another valuable aspect of Pillow is helping you make informed decisions to improve your sleep. Pillow comes with a dedicated section where you can discover trends, get personalized insights, sleep tips, and easily compare your sleep metrics with your weight, steps, caffeine consumption, and other health metrics. If you want to wind down and relax before going to bed or listen to something throughout the night, Pillow also has an expanding collection of sleep aid sounds, guided meditations, bedtime stories, and music produced specifically for sleep. Naps can help boost your productivity and creativity and overall well-being. If you have the ability to take a nap during the day, use Pillow's Power Nap mode. Pillow can wake you up using your iPhone, Apple Watch, or iPad at the lightest possible sleep stage using its smart alarm. Starting with watchOS 6, Pillow's battery consumption is minimal too. Last but not least, Pillow is very privacy-minded. All your sleep and audio data is encrypted and stored on your device and in your iCloud storage account using end-to-end encryption. You don't need to register or create an account to use Pillow. You can use it anonymously, and it doesn't collect or send your personal data anywhere else. Pillow's free to download and use from the App Store, and it comes with a terrific set of great features that you can use every single day. If you want to try Pillow's premium features, there's also an option to start a 7-day free trial. Just visit pillow.app to get started today. Again, that URL to try Pillow is pillow.app. Our thanks to Pillow for the support of the show.
All right, can we talk about the wishes now? So that's the context. I want to start with shortcuts. I mean, obviously,
Yes.
we got shortcuts on macOS Monterey last year. It was the biggest news for on macOS, I think, and it also I think it's the single reason why a ton of iPad users like me were able to reapproach the Mac over the past year. So in macOS 13, I think there's a bunch of ways that Apple could evolve and grow shortcuts for Mac, because there's still a few things missing and a few other things that I would like to see being done in a Mac native way. So obviously, personal automations, right?
Yes.
Personal automations. I think now that we have this much more stable shortcuts app on the Mac, because when it came out in September, it was not a great experience. There were a ton of bugs, a ton of glitches, a ton of inconsistencies between platforms. Apple has worked really hard on improving the shortcuts app for Mac over the past few months, and the results are there. But there's that one feature from iOS and iPadOS that hasn't been ported to macOS, and that's personal automations. And my theory is that Apple will do personal automations on the Mac, but it will not be the exact same feature that we got on the iPhone and iPad, just because the Mac is so different from those platforms when it comes to running things in the background, for example. Some of the limitations and some of maybe the privacy considerations that you have on an iPhone especially, maybe those do not necessarily apply to a Mac. So I think they will do personal automations on the Mac, but I think they will also do it in a way that is consistent with macOS. Meaning, for example, I think if they do personal automations in shortcuts in macOS 13, I think they will have, for sure, file and folder support as triggers. Just because working with the file system is something that we all do with the Finder, right? So, for example, imagine a trigger being, if I place a PDF document with this name on my desktop, like that sort of stuff, I think will absolutely be part of personal automations on the Mac.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that absolutely has to come to the Mac. And I do think it makes sense to tailor it to the Mac specifically. What do you think about home automations, though, Federico? Because those live on the Mac today in the Home app.
Yeah, I think everything will be probably moved into Shortcuts. Once they do that, I think, Shortcuts is the app for automation. Now, it doesn't have an automation section at all, but once it gets that, I think they'll move everything in there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So for Shortcuts, I also would like to see a way to control multiple desktops, or at least work with external displays. Like one of the things that sets the Mac apart from iPad at the moment is you can create multiple desktops, you can have these multiple spaces, and of course you have more options when it comes to working with an external display. I think there's potential here for actions that lets you move between desktops, that allow you to move windows between desktops, but also that lets you control external monitors. So for example, things like moving a window to a monitor, or changing the resolution, changing the, there are plenty of Mac utilities that do this. What's the name of one of the popular ones? Switch ProRes or Switch Res
Oh, right.
X?
Yeah, it's
something like that.
Yeah, right.
So I think there's potential here for Apple to actually offer native actions for multiple desktops as well as external monitors.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room for Mac-specific actions. I think Apple did a great job with bringing the most popular Automator actions over last year. But when you think of things like, well, maybe I have an external drive connected to my Mac for Time Machine backups, and I want to have something happen when I plug that in or when I eject it. There are things like that which aren't possible now in shortcuts that are file related, peripheral related, and that sort of thing that could go a long way to creating some really powerful automations too, which really is just the same kind of thing you're saying with external displays too. Also, Federico, I think one of the things that's fundamentally different between iOS on the one side and macOS on the other is that iOS originally was conceived of as a OS where you don't see the file system. And as a result, the ways you shared things and moved things around the system was very much focused on moving data around, whether it was a copy of an image or a bit of text or whatever it happens to be. And that has always historically been done for the most part through the share sheet. And the Mac has a share sheet. It's different. It's not nearly as robust as what you have on iOS or iPad OS. It works works differently. It's not as well supported, I don't think, by third-party developers. There are some third-party developers doing a great job with the share sheet on the Mac, like GoodLinks, for instance, but a lot of them haven't really even bothered. And I think one of the things that's missing, especially when you talk about Safari and using Safari in shortcuts, is a way to share selected text in a shortcut. Getting text input into a shortcut is too difficult on the Mac right now.
Yeah, I think they're gonna have to do something here, because I don't think Apple wants to replicate the kind of share sheet behavior that they have on iOS, where every shortcut can become an extension in the share sheet. But I also think they should do more when it comes to, obviously they have quick actions in Finder, right? To pass files and other data to a shortcut.
Yep.
But I also think they should do more with the keyboard. So for example, you should be able to run a shortcut from Spotlight and pass some text input from Spotlight. And I also think it should be easier for developers of Mac apps to say, I want to build a shortcut sharing feature. So maybe there's going to be like a shortcuts extensibility framework or something that basically is the equivalent of a Safari extension, but for building shortcuts extensions inside apps. So for example, imagine in Craft, for example, you're going to have a button that says, take this document and pass it to a shortcut. Make it easier for developers to say, okay, absent the share sheet, how can we share data from our application to a shortcut without having to hard code the integration, manually ourselves, as they can do now by effectively using a terminal command, which is what the likes of Better Touch Tool and Launchbar and Raycast are doing. So I wonder if there's a better way there for developers to say, I want to share data with this shortcut. How can I do that? And maybe that could be, as we mentioned before, that could be an API that is actually cross-platform. And so Apple could say, now we have this API for sharing input with a shortcut, and it's available everywhere. It's on Mac, iOS, and iPadOS. And as a result, on iOS and iPadOS, you no longer have to use the URL scheme. So,
that's a great idea.
with one solution, they can fix all these problems. The Mac not having the share sheet and the iOS and iPadOS version of shortcuts still being limited to passing data via a URL.
Right. I mean, another small thing, well, it's not a small thing to me, but I think that the actions for Safari need to be better aligned between the various platforms, right? I mean, it's improved some, but there are actions that show up that you can't use and they work differently. I don't know. It's they need the two sets of actions need to work the same way on both platforms. It's one of the only areas that I can think of where you have actions for the same core system app on the different platforms where they work fundamentally differently in instances. So I'd like to see that cleaned up as well. We should talk about focus modes. I guess this goes back again to your personal automations, because on iOS you can get the status. You can use focus modes as triggers, and obviously you can't do that on the Mac. You can't get the state of focus modes, nor can you use those as a trigger, and that is that's a limitation on the Mac. It's just a shame. I mean, you can do that on your iOS devices and your iPad, but not the Mac.
Yeah, I think there should definitely be more focus-related actions and more filters, more granularity, and I think it should also be part of shortcuts. So I agree.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by SourceGraph. So you've hired a brilliant developer. That's great, but now you have to get them onboarded. If your company is growing, onboarding new developers will be a common occurrence, but it's also a big undertaking every single time. One of the biggest challenges for new hires is getting up to speed with the project their new team is working on. This can be tricky if code bases your developers are working on are already large. Thankfully, SourceGraph makes it easy to move fast, even in those big code bases. Developers know that knowledge is most useful when it's findable. Centralization helps, but given the fact that most companies store knowledge in at least 2 different locations, how do you make knowledge accessible to those who need it? As a code intelligence platform, SourceGraph gives developers what they need to drive their own learning over time and in different situations. Teams without SourceGraph need to rely on asking colleagues or reviewing out-of-date documentation, which is cumbersome and time-consuming. But with SourceGraph, every developer can search across millions of repositories to find specific code, saving time for themselves and everyone else. So when the questions do come up, it's the big stuff that's worthy of your time. SourceGraph was created to make developers' lives easier. And today they work with leading companies across every industry, including 3 out of 5 of the top tech companies, plus PayPal, Uber, Plaid, GE, Reddit, and Atlassian. Visit about.sourcegraph.com to learn more. That's about.sourcegraph.com to find out why some of the biggest tech companies in the world use SourceGraph and to see what it can do for yours. Or just click on the link in the show notes to let them know that you heard about them from us. Our thanks to SourceGraph for their support of the show.
We should talk now about widgets.
Yes,
and the desktop.
And notifications. It's all part and parcel of the same thing. I think we're going to fix this for Apple today.
Okay, so how would you fix it?
So what I would do, I've been thinking about this, and there's the idea that maybe there should be some sort of quasi return to the dashboard. And
I knew you were going to say that. Okay,
but I'm not exactly saying that, because the dashboard used to be, you hit a hotkey and the dashboard would appear. It was like a different view. I actually think the desktop on the Mac ought to become a live desktop. And now that has the problem.
Live desktop. Now that's a marketing name I could see Apple using.
And the thing is, the problem with that idea right off the bat that you can probably foresee is that people have a lot of windows open on their Mac, and then you can't see the desktop necessarily. But I think it can be kept live and used in a modal way where you can have, I'm thinking about your hot corner that you use to show desktop. I think some variant of that could be used to swipe the windows out of the way and let you interact with the desktop. But that's what I mean by live. I don't mean just widgets sitting there static. I mean a combination of 3 things is what I'm foreseeing. One is folders and files that are neatly organized by default using the stacks that we got. It's been at least 3 years ago now. So even if you're the kind of person who puts hundreds of files on your desktop, by default, you'll still have space on your desktop because they'll be organized by type and that sort of thing. Then the other two components on the desktop would be widgets and notifications. And maybe they each get allocated roughly a third of the screen, and they lay out to a grid. They are easy to keep organized and neat and tidy. And I'm not entirely sure what the best way to handle notifications is, but I do know that having notifications and widgets under the clock, clicking on the clock to see them in that sidebar, that's no good. And you can never see more than 3 notifications at any one time, and your widgets are pretty limited too. So I don't know about you, but I really don't ever go in there.
Oh, never. Absolutely not. No, why would I? So I think the idea of a live desktop is interesting. I wonder if maybe one potential solution to make this happen would be to have a desktop split in half. Sort of like the iPad home screen used to be, where you have on the left side an area for widgets, and on the right side, the mess that people usually make out of their desktop.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking about, yeah.
Because I think it's going to look weird if you have, those files and folders scattered everywhere and then widgets intermixed with them. I really don't think there's a way that Apple can mix and match overlapping files and folders and thumbnails with widgets.
No,
so
I don't
maybe
think so either.
The approach, and if they're not doing a dashboard in the sense of this is a separate space just for widgets, we want to use the desktop, well, then maybe, splitting the desktop in half could work. And you could have, a column on the left side with your widgets and an area on the right for your files and folders. You could use drag and drop with those files and folders in between widgets, obviously. And that would free up the current space where notifications and widgets currently live to be just for notifications. And so you would have a longer list of notifications, more space to manage them.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. I mean, because I think you're right in the sense that there needs to be separate spaces for the widgets and the notifications. They need to have room to breathe. They can't be stacked on top of each other like they are today.
Yeah. This is a tricky problem to solve from a design perspective, I think. Because I think Apple can make it look good in screenshots, but in practice on people's computers, you've seen the desktops of some people.
What if it was like the today view on the iPhone, where there's a default space to the left that you can't actually use to open apps. But it's a full screen space that's just widgets and notifications.
But at that point, isn't that dashboard?
Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is. I mean, we're dancing around dashboard a lot here anyway.
Yeah.
But
anyway, they should do something for widgets, and they should bring the Excel widgets from iPad right to the Mac as well. And obviously, I mean, we mentioned this on iOS and iPadOS. Interactivity. Those widgets need to be interactive this time around.
Makes even more sense. Makes even more sense on the Mac. I mean, anything with a keyboard and a pointing device, it makes a lot of sense, including the iPad. Yeah, I mean, all of those wishes go without saying when it comes to the Mac as well. I think that the way that the widgets and the notifications work ought to be in lockstep across all the different platforms.
Yeah.
All right, Federico.
You want to talk about music?
I want to talk about music.
Yes, yes. All I'm going to say about music is that I know that they have redone the app a couple of times, and they're now using this hybrid approach. I think that it's half native, half like a web view because it's Apple Music. I still think it's too slow, and it doesn't behave like a native app. It's slow, and like Apple Music is already like so much slower than Spotify, for example, at searching and opening albums and retrieving data. But my God, it's so slow on the Mac.
It is, and it's buggy. I mean, I have problems with it getting stuck. Like it won't load the Listen Now tab or something, or the Browse tab every now and then. This is to me kind of proving out what my worry was when the music app debuted, which is, I mean, putting the design aside for a moment, the music app was a reskin of iTunes. I mean, in the end of the day, basically all of that code came over, as far as I can tell, all the features. And I think a lot of the underlying code came with it. And that app has been around forever. And I think it shows. And I'd love to see this one redone from the ground up, maybe as a Mac Catalyst app. I don't know. I'm hesitant to say from the ground up only because I know if Apple does that, it will probably be still buggy, just buggy in different ways until it, because the app's just doing so much. I have, problems with AirPlay on the Mac where it still is like it'll play for 1 second out of the speaker on my Mac Studio, then it will switch over to the HomePod, or it will pause for no reason, or it will be delayed sending to the HomePod, or it just won't play at all and it'll say we can't find your HomePod. I mean, there's the AirPlay part of it seems to be really problematic to the point where I don't AirPlay to my HomePod in my office very often anymore. At least not with my Mac. I use my phone or like an iPad that's lying around.
Yeah. I don't have HomePods anymore, so I'm afraid I don't have anything to add.
Well, you're not missing much if you were planning to AirPlay from your Mac.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing that's odd to me, and I know you're not a fan of Shared With You, and I'm not particularly either. However, the one place where I think
it kind of makes sense for music, but yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a fan.
That's where I was going. Is that with music, I think it does make sense. The problem is that's the one Shared With You feature that didn't make it to the Mac, which is baffling to me. So if you send me a link in iMessage to an album, I'll see it in music on my phone or on my iPad, but I won't see it in music on the Mac.
Oh no, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's the only category, of all the ones, the photos, the news articles, the web links, it's the only one that didn't make it to the Mac. And I've never heard an explanation for it. So that one I'd actually like to see come to the Mac. I probably would use it once in a while. Although now that we have Music Box from Marcos Tanaka, if you send me a link, I'm probably going to just drop it in there right away anyway and get to it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, mostly, for me, besides performance and search and, being as fast as Spotify, I think that the thing I would also love to see, they're probably never going to do it, but if they do interactive widgets this year, and this applies to macOS, but it also applies to iOS and iPadOS, what I would love to see is a scrolling widget for real-time lyrics on the home screen and on the desktop. This is just something that I would love to get.
Yeah, that would be cool. I think that would be really fun. I mean, I don't think that that's for everybody, but widgets don't have to be. I mean, that's the whole idea is to let you surface things that might otherwise take a few clicks.
Yeah.
The other thing that I know, this is one that I know Jason Snell has mentioned on Upgrade before, which is, if I'm airplaying music from my iPad when it's connected to the Magic Keyboard and I close it up, the music keeps playing. It keeps streaming from the iPad. That doesn't happen.
Oh, yeah, I guess it does.
Right. Yeah. That doesn't happen when you close your MacBook Air or your MacBook Pro.
But you know why it does that, right? It's because the speakers are under the display, and on the iPad, they're on the sides.
No, I'm talking about airplane to a HomePod or something.
So if I close my iPad, the music keeps playing.
Right.
But if I close my Mac, when you are airplaying to a HomePod, it stops? Really?
Yeah, it does.
I guess I never did it because I don't have HomePods anymore.
Right.
That's weird.
It's a Mac thing. Well, and it's the kind of thing that now that the M1 is out, you would think that maybe that's something that could be added because it is, it's one of those things where a lot of times I'll be sitting on the couch, maybe checking my email, doing some light work or something, and I'm airplaying to my HomePods in my living room. And then I have to get up to go do something, so I close the iPad, and the music keeps playing, which is great. But if I'm doing it with my MacBook Air, it just stops, and I forget that that's the way it works, and it's always frustrating because it's like, well, all right, I guess I really shouldn't be airplaying from a Mac ever. I should always be using my phone that's in my pocket because at least it will keep going. Yeah, so I'd like to see that. It's a small thing, but it is something that's one of those paper cuts that comes up pretty often if you work between different devices. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Instabug. Building mobile apps presents some challenges, as well as bugs, crashes, and performance issues that can be a nightmare for developers. But what if you could not only detect all of those issues, but also get a holistic understanding of the quality of your app from the point of view of your users? Instabug's lightweight SDK grabs all of the insights you need to build top-quality mobile apps. through comprehensive bug and crash reports, performance monitoring, and real-time user feedback, all in one SDK. With Instabug, you can continuously monitor and measure the performance of your app as perceived by your users, empower your users to report issues and ask questions seamlessly from right inside your app, get all of the information you need about bugs, crashes, and other issues, and get them fixed in record time, all with a focus on privacy and security. And you don't have to worry about the hassle of switching to a new tool, because Instabug only takes a minute to integrate with your app, and it fits right within your workflow, with support for Jira, Slack, Trello, GitHub, Zendesk, and over 10 other popular tools. Join over 25,000 top mobile developers around the world who use Instabug to ship top-quality apps. Go to try.instabug.com/appstories to check it out today. Again, that URL is try.instabug.com/appstories. Our thanks to Instabug for their support of the show.
All right, we have a grab bag of other things that it's like one feature per category, just a collection of other macOS things we would love to get. I'm just going to pick randomly from this list, John. Let's see. I have this thing with system preferences. System preferences on the Mac. I can never find anything. I don't know why. I like the icons, okay? But I still find settings on iPhone so much easier and faster to find what I'm looking for. I can never find anything in system preferences.
That may be, I don't know, that may be experience.
Maybe because I'm mute. Maybe it's experience. Yeah, maybe. I guess what I would like to see is a simplified design that is like rebranded as settings, and that's more in line with the iPhone and iPad.
Yeah, I do agree that I think that they should be more closely related, because especially with people coming over from the iPhone and so forth, you would think the first thing they'll look for is a settings app, not a system preferences app.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's so different. And then also allow me to pick something that I've mentioned before. I don't want to talk about this again, but reading list in Safari. This we have covered on iPhone and iPad. I wrote about this in Mac Stories Weekly as, one of the standalone apps that Apple should make. I really believe the reading list should be a standalone thing. Go read that article for, as to how I built my case for a reading list application. But I mean, I would love to get any reading list update in Safari this year. And in Safari for Mac, I don't think Apple will get rid of the compact tab bar mode that they introduced last year that nobody uses. When I say nobody, it's the one connected. We use the expression, it's the royal nobody. I know that somebody uses
yes.
it, but it's a very small percentage of people. That UI is terrible on the Mac and iPad. I don't think it will be gone this year. Still, reading list, any update would work, right? Let me, tag articles. Let me organize them in folders. Support highlights, like any sign of life would be welcome.
Well, and it kind of feels tacked on at this point, because they just kind of squished it down at the bottom of the sidebar where they put the tags, the tab groups. And it reminds me a little bit of when Books got its update, not its big update with Monterey, but before that, when audiobooks moved over from iTunes and the music app to the actual Books app. It was this sad little player that was tacked on to the bottom of the sidebar in Books. And it feels a little bit like that with bookmarks and reading list. I feel like those two things, if they're going to survive, need to have a better home than where they are right now.
Yeah. What else you got for me?
Well, I'm going to mention Notes, and we've talked about this a lot in other contexts with iOS and iPadOS, so I don't think there's a lot to reiterate here, but I do think that smart folders is a good direction for Notes to be going in, but it needs to incorporate more metadata than it does today, not just tags. And we also talked about Apple finding a way to create a user-friendly version of cross-linking between notes, kind of in the way that Obsidian does or Craft does, but in a way that's not quite as nerdy and that will work for a wider audience. And I think that would be a great addition this year too.
So something else I'm gonna pick. I would love to go back to using Apple Mail because for better or worse, I really like the native design. But there's a few things that Apple should do. Hopefully this year, I don't know. Search in Mail is so unreliable and slow. I
Yeah,
can never find what I'm looking for. I guess maybe the issue is that I got 13 years of Gmail to process. I don't know. But searching other apps like Spark or Outlook, or I mean, obviously Gmail is so much faster. I have been liking and using MimeStream on the Mac, which
hmm
is a nice. It's this nice hybrid because it's like it's a Gmail client, but it's got that native look that almost looks like Mail. So, and I really hope that Apple improves the performance, especially for Gmail users. But I also think Apple should do more with extensions. We have basically haven't seen any MailKit extension worth covering this year. I think there
I
is
know.
one extension on the Mac App Store for
Yes.
Mail, and it does a bunch of things that are actually already built into Mail. So I'm not sure why you need that extension.
Yeah, no, I saw that you guys talked about that on Connected, and it's true. I did go out at one point months ago and look for mail extensions, and there were none at the time. And if you look now, there's one that you guys found, and I don't know that there are really any more than that.
Yeah. And I also think Apple should do something for, modernizing mail. Like we keep mentioning this every year, but especially on the Mac where so many people get work done. There's got to be some way that Apple can do things like snoozing or having integration with apps that doesn't involve drag and drop or doesn't involve printing a message to a PDF.
Right.
Things like that. I would love to see some more modern things in mail. And really, you can pick and choose from a long catalog of third party alternatives on the App Store: snoozing, app integrations, automatic categorization of your inbox, machine learning based, feeds for newsletters and social updates or things like that. Like, there's so much choice when it comes
Yeah.
to modern email features. I would love to see Apple try something here.
Delayed sending is one of the ones I like too. I'd kind of like to see that because there are times when I'll line up a bunch of emails to respond to on like a Sunday afternoon, and I don't really want to email people on a Sunday afternoon if it's not super important. But I don't really want to keep a lot of drafts sitting around that I have to remember to go hit send on Monday
Mhm.
morning. So having a delayed send feature would be pretty cool too.
Yeah. All right. You got one more. You got to
Well,
choose
I've
wisely.
got two more. I actually have two
Okay,
more.
two.
The
I'll allow
first
that.
the first one is messages, and I think more features with messages would be good. WhatsApp and other messaging clients do a better job of having more ways to communicate with people. I think tapbacks should be expanded. But what I really want more than any feature is just the ability to find and navigate back to old conversations faster. The search I find hard to use. It doesn't actually highlight the message when you do the search term. It doesn't actually highlight that term in the messages. I don't think it actually gets you close to them, but you have to kind of scroll around a little to find exactly where that word appears. And if instead what you're trying to do is just go back chronologically by scrolling, it only does like this small amount of your message thread before it has to kind of churn and load another chunk of your messages. And it very often can like kind of hop around a little bit and it's really frustrating. It's an issue on iOS and iPadOS too, but I think it's worse on the Mac.
Hmm.
And then the last thing I want to mention is calendar. I think I like calendar. I've kind of gone back and forth between it and Fantastical. There are things in Fantastical that I like a lot. It's got more features than I really need, so I kind of feel like I'm not really getting my money's worth necessarily with that subscription. Whereas what I like about calendar, I really like the design. I think the dark mode is particularly good. I don't like the dark mode on Fantastical all that much. And so I'd kind of like a hybrid of those two. And I'd like it's just some of the more simple features, I guess. They're not simple, but they're ones that have been in Fantastical for a long time, like calendar sets. I'd love to have that. And maybe better integration with things like Zoom and WebEx and Skype and all that would be nice too. Instead of having you can get a link and put it in the notes section, click on it, get your empty ghost tab going in Safari, and then the app opens, and then you're up and running eventually. If there was tighter integration there, deeper integration for those kinds of apps, that would be nice as well. All right, Federico, you got any more, or are we done for today?
I think we're done for today and for this year.
I think so too. I think it's time to coast into WWDC. We got a lot of work to do to get ready, but we'll be ready. We'll have lots of things going on. So keep looking at the site. Keep visiting macstories.net. You'll find out more very soon. I want to thank our 3 sponsors again for this episode. That's Pillow, SourceGraph, and Instabug. If you want to get extended versions of this show and get the pre-show, where this time we talked about how I'm going to be going out to WWDC and what that's all about and how I'm preparing, you can go to appstories.plus and get those extended episodes a day early and in high bit rate audio with no ads. And Federico, we're going to have lots of other stuff going on for App Stories Plus people during WWDC. So, this is a really good time to join App Stories Plus.
Yes.
You can find the 2 of us over at Mac Stories all the time too, and on Twitter and Instagram, where Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.